everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. And how sweet is it, man? The Duke Blue Devils are headed to the Sweet 16 for the ninth time, I think, in the last 14 NCAA tournaments. And for the first time in the John Shire era, so that's pretty cool. I've been kind of, I don't know. This team's been very up and down. They've been very up and down, especially lately, but throughout a lot of this season. And part of me thinks that this Duke team, I can't help but compare it. I have such a like historical brain when it comes to these things, and I'm constantly thinking of, what team is this one like? And it is not even necessarily like a structure thing, but more so a just seeding and who they're playing type thing. When you look at the 2015-16 team, I can't help but draw some comparisons. Playing a 13 seed, coming off a quarterfinal exit in the ACC tournament and coming off losing their last game of the season to Carolina in Cameron. They did both of those things in 2016. Then got a 4 seed, played a 13 seed that some people were like, hey, something could happen maybe here because Duke's been slipping. They haven't looked that great. And then Duke pulled off a win. I think this year's team was a little more convincing in that first round game. The 2016 team required a career game from Marshall Plumlee to escape UNCW. I won't lie to you. I think back then in 2016 when I filled out my bracket, I think I picked UNCW to beat Duke in that game actually, which is kind of wild to think back on. I think that one was 93-85 Duke in the first round, and then that season Yale, a 12 seed, beat Baylor, a 5 seed. And so the Blue Devils got Yale in the second round and built up this really large lead early on. I think something like a 25-point lead. And then it only ended up beating Yale by like 7 points. And so when Duke built this lead on Sunday against number 12 seed James Madison, 22-point lead at the half, I'm sitting there thinking, they're going to win this game. But part of me was thinking, they might lose this lead, though, a little bit. And that's why, because that 2016 team was on my mind. It was on my mind so much that I was thinking, we're probably going to see something similar here. We didn't. We did not see something similar. We saw this Duke team put pedal to the metal in a way that it has only done maybe a couple times this season, really. I think that, Miami game is a good example, but James Madison is a much better team than Miami. You can even say James Madison played poorly in that game or whatever, but they were in the round of 32 for a reason, man. James Madison only had 3 losses on the season coming into Sunday, and they had just beaten 5 seed Wisconsin without really much trouble 2 days ago. I will say I think Wisconsin was a bit of a fraudulent 5 seed. Wisconsin was not a 5 seed. By resume, by record, by eye test, they were not a 5 seed. And so, yeah, James Madison got a bit of of a lucky draw in terms of getting what 5 seed you were going to get. But nonetheless, it's not like Wisconsin was a pushover. They were still a Big Ten team that had beaten Purdue a week prior, right? So a capable team. And I feel like everybody kind of figured James Madison would win the game. But that doesn't make it any less impressive, I think. It's still an impressive win. James Madison was still a good team, and there were plenty of people talking about how James Madison was going to end up knocking Duke off. There were a lot of people that were like, James Madison has the favorable matchup. Duke's just not the team that we thought they were. They're not good. I like James Madison here. People were betting the James Madison line like crazy. And honestly, mentally, I was sort of there with you. The people that were betting that line. Not because I thought Duke was going to lose the game, but admittedly, I thought it would be a fairly close game, if I'm being honest. And again, that goes back to my historical brain, thinking back to that 2016 team. And, having cleared now the first weekend in a much more convincing manner than that 2016 team did. I think maybe they shed a little bit of that comparison, but I can't help but look at the bracket that's right next to me. You guys can't see it. I've got this really sick 3 feet by 2 feet NCAA tournament bracket where I've got the logos pasted up there. I do that. Now, I started doing it last year where I make a file on Illustrator with the big giant bracket. And then I put the logos up as teams win, and I get it printed at CVS. So that's a cool little idea. If you guys want to do some sort of big bracket, I think it's really fun to do. And because every time somebody wins, you get to glue a logo up there. I don't know. I have fun with it. But I can't help but look at that right now and see Duke Houston, right? A 1 seed versus a 4 seed. And I can't help but notice the trend, right? 2016 played a 13 seed, a 12 seed, and then they met their end against a number 1 seed Oregon. Number 1 seed. Now, Houston's shown some cracks. They've shown some flaws. If Texas A&M hadn't played maybe some of the most reckless kind of decision-making style of basketball I've ever seen in my entire life, they probably win. That and the fact that they missed, 18, 20 free throws. Texas A&M missed 1 million free throws against Houston. I'm honestly unsure how they even managed to force overtime and score what they did in that game. That was ridiculously, I turned the game off with 2 minutes. It was this one's over. And I checked the score just because I was curious to see what Houston won by, only to see that it was a 4-point game. I turned it back on. Couldn't believe they forced overtime. And then honestly, the thing I really couldn't believe, though, was the shot selection from Wade Taylor was just abysmal. I don't even know what dude was thinking. I don't know who bro thinks he is. But those shot attempts were just horrendous. I did a comical face palm every single time I saw that dude shoot. It was rough. So even though 4 dudes fouled out for Houston, you knew Houston was going to win during overtime because A&M's decision making was just horrible. But Houston escapes. They showed some weaknesses. There is a route to victory for Duke. I certainly think, and I think there's a much better route for victory against Houston now than there was for Duke in 2016 against Oregon.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network or DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
But I cannot help but see the trend here. This team feels similar. Very similar. Even that tournament is similar. When you think about how many ACC teams made it to the Sweet 16, I think it might have even been 6. Fact check me on that, but made the Sweet 16 in 2016. And I remember there being 2 Elite 8 matchups between Carolina and Notre Dame and then Syracuse and Virginia that year. And, all 4 ACC teams currently in the Sweet 16 are 1 win away from making that happen again. We could potentially get Carolina, Clemson, and then Duke, NC State. That's not out of the question. I wouldn't say it's incredibly likely that those 4 teams win, particularly Clemson. I would not put money on them beating Arizona. But, it's not out of the question or anything that is something that can happen. And I just keep drawing these comparisons and these comparisons and these comparisons. And another historical stat that I'm looking back at is the fact that Duke has not beat a team seeded higher than them in the NCAA tournament since 1994. It's been 30 years since Duke has defeated a team seeded higher than them. They beat Purdue, number 1 seed Purdue, in the Elite 8 in 94. Duke was a 2 seed that season. So that's the first time, as the last time that's happened. I think they've actually only played a higher seed 5 times since then. So in 30 years, and considering the fact that Duke has been in all but 2 of the NCAA tournament since that point, and that they have only played a higher seed 5 times, that's a testament to just how consistently good Duke's been, I think, because in that time frame too, they've appeared in 4 national championships, and I think 6 Final Fours, and won 3 national championships. So for them to have not beat a team higher seeded than them means they made all those Final Four runs, all those championship runs, without playing a team seeded higher than them. They played teams seeded on the same line. I mean, if you wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of like who's the higher 1 seed, but we're not going to do that for this sense. And it's just crazy to think about. I mean, last season they were a 5 seed, lost to 4th seeded Tennessee. 2018, obviously, they were a 2 seed, lost to 1 seed Kansas. Kind of the same 2-1 dynamic with Louisville in 13. But there's just been so few examples of Duke getting these opportunities. They've lost the last 5. You got to think maybe, this streak's got to end at some point, right? It's got to end at some point. And I keep going back, and I think the theme so far of this first 11 minutes of me talking has been going back to these historical bases, looking back at historical precedent, teams to compare with. Well, you know what? Maybe that's where I'm going wrong. Maybe that's where I'm losing it a little bit, because this team is its own team. 2016. I mean, just look at the player personnel. It's a different team. One could even argue it's like, well, there's the whole tripping scandal started with Grayson Allen that year, and Duke's actually seen a similar thing with Kyle Filipowski this year. It's kind of eerie in that sense. But then you really look at the personnel, and you're like, well, that 2016 team wasn't quite the same. They had Allen, they had Matt Jones, and they had Marshall Plumlee returning to the team. Emil Jefferson had returned, but he missed pretty much, the last 3/4 of the season that year. So you had Derek Thornton running the point guard, Luke Kennard off the bench, but this team's different because 4 of the starters right now are returning key players from last year's team. There's not a Brandon Ingram on this team, but in a similar way, there wasn't a Jared McCain on that one. And there's no Jeremy Roach on the 2016 team. In a similar way, there's no Marshall Plumlee on this one. So Ryan Young's not exactly Marshall Plumlee. One might make that comparison. It's not a great one. But as far as those comparisons go, and as far as I believe in looking at those historical comparisons, because I think there is something there. There's something there. History loves to repeat itself. And I think there's a pretty good chance that history repeats itself on Friday. Like, if you're betting money, Houston's the favorite. They're the favorite. Houston is the best defensive team left, period. Although Duke has been a phenomenal defensive team through 2 games, there will be the counter argument that Duke has played a 13 and a 12 seed, which I won't argue that maybe isn't playing a factor, but they are tournament teams. They are good teams, and what that doesn't, devalue what Duke has done defensively or offensively for that matter. And I think that, history might repeat itself, but maybe it won't. This is a completely new team. And I think I tweeted it that it was just like, that team against James Madison looked completely different than the team we had seen the last 2 weeks. Duke looked really good, heading into that Wake Forest game. And then, honestly, they looked pretty decent even in defeat against Wake Forest. And then post-Wake Forest, kind of in between Wake and Carolina, again, Duke looked really good, particularly in that NC State game in PNC Arena. I was very impressed by that. And then that Carolina game hits, and Jeremy Roach just he's just not on his game. which is weird because he's the beacon of consistency for this team, and he just wasn't able to get things done. And so it was really tough to see that, and it was tough to see the team struggle for the majority of the game and not be able to put it together quick enough, or a complete comeback. They couldn't put together a complete comeback in that game, and they looked off. And so at that point, I think a lot of fans were thinking, and I was thinking, that they're going to, bounce back. The ACC tournament is kind of Duke's thing. They're going to make their way back here. And then they drew State and looked bad. I mean, they lost that game from tip to finish. They had a shot at it at the very end, but I think the case has been for this Duke team in close games nearly every time, with a couple of exceptions, has been too little too late. They make a push at the very end, but it's just not enough, and they started that comeback way too late. We saw it against Arkansas. We saw it, well, not really against Georgia Tech. Actually, they kind of blew a lead against Georgia Tech, but we definitely saw it against Arkansas, and saw it against Carolina, and saw it against State. Just too little too late in close games. And that one was a tough pill to swallow. It maybe was a little bit easier of a pill to swallow once we saw that NC State is kind of on its 1983 replication tour right now, and still is, because they're still in the Sweet 16, and Duke and State are actually a game away from getting a rematch of that game. But you couldn't help but just sit there and think, man, this team feels like a first weekend team. Just like off vibes, right? Like on paper, there's still more than good enough to make a Final Four push, is kind of what the thought process was, I think. But they really felt maybe like a first weekend team. And that Vermont game hit in kind of the beginning, you couldn't help but be nervous, right? They didn't look terrific in that one. And it wasn't because Vermont was doing anything crazy. They did hit some kind of nutty shots. It was a 5-point game at the half, and you had to be a little bit nervous. Overall, you look at that Vermont game, no Caleb Foster for the rest of the tournament. I don't think that really came as any sort of surprise, that announcement. But honestly, I think in any close game during tournament play, Duke's not going to get a whole lot offensively, and probably not a whole lot, period, from the bench. And I think that's a predictable thing. And when you look at the Vermont game, Sean Stewart played the most amount off the bench of any player. This is a 17-point game. Now, Duke pulled away late in this one, so it's not like they were dominant or anything for most of this game, but they controlled the game in a way that kept Vermont under their foot and made sure that they didn't give Vermont too much momentum even when they weren't playing their best ball. So, yeah, most minutes off the bench were Sean Stewart. He got 1 point at the free throw line. TJ Power played a minute. He didn't score. Ryan Young played 2 minutes. Actually, Sean Stewart didn't play the most minutes off the bench. I actually retract that statement. Jalen Blakes played the most minutes. He had 9 minutes, and he scored 2 points off his first. He had a fast break, and then he also had 3 steals, basically in a row. And on the 2 final steals, the most recent steals, I guess, of the 3. He was going a million miles an hour, just Tasmanian devil style, dribbled over his head and lost the ball twice. And those were tough moments to watch. I love Jalen Blake's effort, but I think that if you're playing in a close game, just offensively speaking, I don't think I've seen Jalen Blake sit and jump shot in 3 months. So I just don't know if you can put any trust, really, in Blake's offensively. And there wasn't a whole lot there. 2 points. Spencer Hubbard ended up playing, but it's crazy that 4 points, right? Four bench points. Still won by 17, though. And the even crazier part about the 4 bench points is 4 bench points and 3 points for Kyle Filipowski. 3. I mean, he had 12 rebounds. 12 rebounds, 4 assists. He did a pretty decent job passing. Actually, only 1 turnover and 3 blocks. Honestly, one of my favorite Filipowski games of the year, and it's because he was just constantly double-teamed. And I think at the beginning of the game, Duke didn't really understand how to handle that, and Kyle didn't understand how to handle that, and he got rushed and he looked frantic maybe the first few times it happened. But as the game developed, Filipowski was very fast that they didn't stop giving him the ball, which I think is important. It's important to give him those touches. You can't just fear that double team and be like, oh no, let's just do some dribble isolation ball, which is what Duke has done very often throughout the season when Filipowski isn't working out. And that's a mistake every time because Duke's horrible in isolation play. They have proven time and time again that doesn't work. And so I was happy that they kept giving him the ball because Vermont didn't stop double teaming him, and Filipowski woes up and he started tossing, passes immediately once the entry pass came in. He was looking cross court whip, kind of Jokic style passes immediately. I mean, he's no DJ Burns maybe I'm just kidding as a passer, but he was very effective at doing that. And so only 3 points without making a shot. All free throws for Filipowski. I mean, if you tell me coming into that game that Kyle Filipowski isn't going to hit a single shot, but he did play, and he played 37 minutes. It's not even like foul trouble was a big deal, and he had 2 fouls. So, but the fact that Flip would play that whole game, not hit a single shot, the bench would only give you 4 points with 1 made field goal, and you win by 7. 15 points by Mark Mitchell. He got the player of the game. 13 from Proctor, 15 from McCain, and 14 from Roach. Roach didn't play the greatest game, but I think it was a stepping stone in the right direction. And I think he continued to step in the right direction in the James Madison game. Particularly, this was a good game for Mitchell because early when Duke was struggling, they found a lot of success in cutting and dump-offs to Mitchell. And then there was a little bit of three-point success from Tyrese Proctor that continued into the James Madison game. I didn't even, mention the fact that Duke held Vermont to 47 points, and then James Madison to 55. They're holding their opponents to an average of 51 right now, which is kind of crazy. And so in that James Madison game, I mentioned Proctor, 4 of 10 from 3. He was not scared to shoot the ball. Even when he missed the first couple, he kept firing. He was not scared to put the ball up from 3, and I love that. He had 5 dimes, 18 points from Proctor. That's the kind of game they need from him. This was the best possible game Duke could have asked for. They played a stellar defensive game and just shot the freaking leather off the ball, man. I mean, they shot 50% dead on from 3, 14 out of 28. Just ludicrous. Shot over 50% from the floor. Terrific effort, man. Just terrific. I mean, outdid James Madison in every single facet of the game. They had 22 assists on 33 made shots. That's big time. Obviously, the story of that game was Jared McCain with 30 points on 8 of 11 shooting from 3. Those 8 threes ties his own freshman record for most threes in a game by a Duke freshman. He also broke the record for most threes in a NCAA tournament game by a Duke player. And that was the second most threes hit by a freshman in an NCAA tournament game, period, all time. He also had the second highest scoring game by a Duke freshman in an NCAA tournament game. That is second only to Zion Williamson against UCF in the Taco game. So just also he had the most first half points by any player in this tournament through that point, and he had 22 points in the first half. It was very reminiscent of that Florida State game where he was just shooting terrifically. I hope he follows it up better than he did that Florida State game. But 30 points, just a freaking magnificent game from McCain, 18 from Proctor. I mean, when the two of them are shooting a combined 12 of 21 from 3, I really honestly don't think you can beat Duke when that happens. And the funny thing is, it was really just those two guys because, Roach only shot 2 threes. He did shoot, 2 dead ball threes after calls, and he made both of those. That's funny. But that's also a good sign because that's a good, sign of if the dude's in rhythm and if he's shooting well, and it seemed like Roach was. Roach did have that dislocated finger, but it was on his non-shooting hand. It ended up coming back. I was really worried there when I saw him on the bench, man. Dude was in a lot of pain. I think he might be a bit like me where he gets nauseous with pain like that, with unfamiliar pain especially. I can relate to that, but he comes back in the game and he has a step forward in the right direction. 5 of 8 from the floor, 1 of 2 from 3, 6 assists, and 15 points. A step in a brilliant brilliantly positive direction. Kyle had a good game, just 6 of 8 from the floor. Didn't have to do a whole lot, but was efficient and was really good. 14 points, and again, I can't do anything but rave about his defense. Filipowski has been fantastic defensively for the first 2 games of this tournament. And then there's Mark Mitchell, who only had 2, but he only needed 2. Player of the game and against Vermont, but he didn't do a whole lot against James Madison. He wasn't really required because Duke's game was a very 3-point oriented offense. They got more from the bench against James Madison, which is predictable in a 38-point win, right? 5 points from Sean, 2 of 2 from the floor. Those both came late. He also had 6 boards though. 3 points right, TJ Power. He hit a 3 toward the end of the game. Ryan Young had 3 points. Spencer Hubbard got an NCAA tournament point. That's big. Jalen Blakes also had 2 points. Jalen Blakes also wiped the heck out on a dunk attempt. I don't even know if I agree with a flagrant foul being issued on that play, but that was a tough fall for Jalen Blakes. And I hope the young man's all right. But a little more from the bench. I don't expect to get that much from the bench against Houston. I really don't. I think it's an iron 5 scenario for Duke right now. Those 5 guys are going to be doing the vast majority of the work. I think there's zero doubt in my mind about that. But what an impressive start. What an impressive game for this Duke team to kind of get their confidence back, get their rhythm back, shut out some of the haters who didn't think that they could make this kind of noise, right? There are a lot of people who didn't think this Duke team would make it out of the first week and didn't think they could. Because of their recent play. But I'm looking at that bracket right now, and sure looks like I've got a Duke logo in the Sweet 16, so they're there. They're there, and they've got a tough game. It's Houston, and it's basically a road game. It's basically going to be at Houston. I mean, it's not actually, but it might as well be, right? So it's going to be tough. It's going to be a really tough game for Duke to win, and they're going to need to not replicate the shooting night they had against James Madison, because odds are they aren't able to replicate that again. Shot for shot. That was just a crazy shooting game. But they're going to need to be able to hit some threes, keep Houston on its toes, and hang tough. Hang tough and really hope that the officials aren't calling the game soft. Because if they're calling the game soft, Houston is hard-nosed. They drive. They get to the rack. And if they're calling the game soft, Filipowski is going to get in foul trouble, and that just spells trouble for Duke. They need to keep Filipowski out of foul trouble. That is a big key to winning these games. Whether he's scoring or not, he is necessary defensively and both as a focal point of the offense to draw attention and be able to distribute the ball out to the guards and open up three-point looks. He's very, very, very much necessary for Duke to have a successful game against Houston. So it's been since 1994 since the Blue Devils have beat a higher-seeded team. Does that end on Friday? I don't know. I'm not sure. They have certainly turned a corner, I think. And I think they have done better than quite a many people expected of them. But the true test comes Friday, right? Because if Duke flounders, they flop out against Houston, people are just going to say, well, those first 2 rounds, 13 seed, 12 seed, whatever, they were supposed to win those games. And when push came to shove and when Duke had to put up or shut up against a number 1 seed, they shut up. If that's what happens, it's going to be easy to kind of write off what happened in the first 2 rounds of this tournament, which was Duke having a tremendous showing. And John Shire reaching his first Sweet 16. These guys kind of getting their swagger back, getting their belief back, seeing some smiles on these guys' faces again was really nice. And because all the attention right now in the ACC is on number 1 seed North Carolina, who many people think have a championship chance, and number 11 seed NC State, who has amazingly won their last 7 games and is in the Sweet 16. And I think for Duke, this game is the most pivotal game. Even like in a hypothetical Final Four run, this is their most important, crucial game. This is the one, man. If you're Duke, if you lose this game again, people are going to try to write off what you did in the first 2 rounds. You're Duke, people don't like you. That's just how it's going to be. If you win this game, if you break that 30 year stretch of not beating a team seeded higher, the momentum you get from beating that 1 seed is going to be amazing. Amazing momentum. And at that point, you beat Houston, I would argue Duke is then the favorite to come out of the South. I would make that argument. And I think if Marquette beats State, I like Duke's matchup with Marquette in that hypothetical game. I actually like the game with State less. Because if State makes it to the Elite Eight, right, they have got every bit of Cinderella magic working for them, and that's not going to be an easy game. But, again, it's a team Duke's beat by 15 points this season. It's a team they certainly can beat, and maybe on paper should beat. But I think if you get past Houston, you've done the hard part. You theoretically have an easier game, in my opinion, in the Elite Eight either way, probably. So that could set Duke up for a Final Four run. This is the pivotal game. This is the put up or shut up game for Duke. It's not going to be an easy one, and we'll talk more about this, in days to come on Twitter, podcasts. There's going to be plenty of discussion about this matchup and how Duke, specifically the X's and the O's. But just looking at this, Duke has surprised some people, and they surprised me. With that James Madison game in particular. The Vermont game was more or less what I expected. I thought they'd look a little shaky. They'd get the win. James Madison, for me, was kind of like James Madison's good. Like, they're like the top of mid-majors outside of Gonzaga, right? And this season, at least. And it just felt like, man, this Duke team hasn't looked convincing for quite some time. And this James Madison team has looked convincing, and they completely reversed that. They turned all that rhetoric, all those narratives right on their head by having just a fabulous shooting night, and they proved to everybody that this is Duke basketball. 30 years since they beat a team seated higher than them, and I think a lot of that reason is Duke's never the underdog, right? How many NCAA tournament games have they played since 94? Whole lot more than those 5 they've lost to higher seeded teams, because Duke's not the underdog. Duke is usually the higher seeded team, and quite frankly, I think even when they're not, Quinn Cook said it best: Duke is never the underdog. Duke's power in college basketball is that they are playing a number 1 seed. Everybody almost always wants a number 1 seed to lose. I guarantee you the college basketball world is rooting for the Houston Cougars on Friday. And I think that says something about the brand. But this Duke team has a chance to really reverse the narrative that has been spun about this squad throughout the year, that they haven't been able to live up to the hype, live up to the standard that was set for them preseason. They can turn that completely on its head. Or they can confirm that that shot-for-shot comparison with the 2015-16 team. It would feel almost like a replicated kind of season in a lot of ways if they lose to Houston. So it's interesting. I think this is a really interesting tournament, and I'll be talking a lot more about the specifics of that Houston game and some more ACC kind of wide-ranging narrative as well as the week goes on, both on Twitter, and hopefully I'll be able to record another episode for Thursday. That's the hope, at least. But for now, Duke's in the Sweet 16. They're there, man. Duke is in the Sweet 16. Vermont down, James Madison down. Houston up next. As always, guys, thanks so much for listening. Make sure to follow Duke Wisdom on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure to subscribe or follow the podcast wherever it is you're listening. Thanks so much.